Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on today's video. In today's video, we're in session number 2 of our new series entitled The QME Forensic Super Sleuth, the Super Sleuth. And the philosophy of this program has to deal with what they don't tell us. What the parties don't tell us that we as qualified medical evaluators, in adopting the role of a super sleuth, have to figure out on our own, through our own determination, through our own investigation, through our own interrogations, and through our own pursuing of the issues involved with each and every QME evaluation. And the outline of this program has to do, number 1, with what the parties don't tell us in their cover letters, which, if we knew, would help us to better be able to orchestrate and carry out our face-to-face evaluation effectively so that we, in the end, could resolve disputed issues. And as qualified medical evaluators, surprise, surprise, it sure helps if we know in advance what are the disputed issues that we're supposed to be addressing in our evaluations. But many times, the parties don't tell us. They don't make us privy to this information, which if they did, if they would, it would be so much easier. So as a qualified medical evaluator, we're required to be a super sleuth in determining the issues involved in our evaluation. Number 2 is we're going to explore in later sessions of this program what they don't tell us, meaning what examinees don't tell us in the physical examination that we as qualified medical evaluators have to ourselves figure out. So, for example, in the physical examination, examinees may report symptoms or reproduction of their pains during certain physical examination maneuvers, and we as qualified medical evaluators, as super sleuths, have to use our medical decision-making skills to determine what the examinee's positive response to provocative maneuvers in the physical examination means in terms of the overall opinions and conclusions of the case. And many times examinees don't tell us their true, positive, objective physical examination findings. Many times examinees don't tell us what are their true limitations to activities of daily living. Many times examinees don't tell us what exactly happened in the industrial injury that they are alleging. In other words, they're many times vague on the mechanism of injury. They're vague on their physical examination findings. They're vague on their limitations to activities of daily living. And we as qualified medical evaluators are counted on, are relied upon to provide opinions and conclusions in the final QME report that are accurate reflections of the examinee's true condition. How can we do this? How can we arrive at accurate opinions and conclusions when examinees don't always tell us the information that we need to know? So we need to be a super sleuth in the face-to-face and physical examination with the examinee. So that's number 2. And then number 3, the QME is required to be a super sleuth when going into the great unknown, the great gray area involved with qualified medical evaluations, and that has to do with depositions. Now, I know many of you loathe depositions, and there's a few of you out there that actually like and enjoy depositions. Well, I can tell you for both groups of you, regardless of which group you're in, I'm sure you'll agree with me that depositions would be much more enjoyable. They would be a lot funner. They would be a lot less dreaded if we actually knew the questions that the attorneys were going to ask of us prior to going in to the deposition. one of the challenges with depositions is we don't know. They don't tell us. They don't tell us what their agenda is for calling for the deposition. They don't tell us what their agenda is in formulating the questions that they pop on us as surprise questions when it comes time to sitting down in the boiler room of the deposition with two attorneys and a court reporter staring intently down at you as they surprise you with these pop quiz out of thin air types of questions. Wouldn't depositions be so much more fun, so much more enjoyable, so much more of a thing to look forward to as a learning experience if you actually knew the questions that the parties were planning on presenting to you in deposition? Yes, indeed, depositions would be much less of a dreaded type of affair. So the philosophy of this program is how you, as a qualified medical evaluator, super sleuth, using your own determination and your own investigative, forensic, and medical skills, can get the information that you need to come out at the end of the report looking like a hero, looking like a super champ, and smelling like a rose, that you resolved the disputed issues accurately and once and for all. And in session 1 of this program, we talked about what they don't tell us in cover letters, and that has to do with determining the scope of the evaluation. So we talked about how to determine what your role and what your duties are in the evaluation. And we began that discussion by reviewing QME Forms 105 and 106, which are what the parties use when they order a qualified medical evaluation. And when the parties order a qualified medical evaluation, they fill out either one or the other of these forms, depending upon whether the examinee is a represented injured worker or an unrepresented injured worker. And the parties have to indicate on these forms what is the nature or what is the dispute that drives the need for the evaluation. But many times they don't tell us as the qualified medical evaluator what is the dispute driving the need for the qualified medical evaluation, and we're left to ourselves as super sleuths to figure this out. And I showed you how to become familiar with the issues, the finite list of disputed issues that drive the need for a qualified medical evaluation. So that was part A of this discussion. Part B, which I want to go over with you today, I want to get into more detail regarding the labor codes that govern the QME panel process, which are labor codes 4060, 4061, and 4062, so that you can understand how each one of these labor codes resolves different disputed issues within your examinee's particular case, and how, if you can understand in advance what is the disputed issue and which labor code is driving the need for your evaluation, that will tell you exactly what physical examination procedures you need to do in the face-to-face evaluation, what line of questioning you need to pursue in the face-to-face evaluation, and how to format and formulate your finished QME product so that it resolves the disputed issue and doesn't dip into issues that are not issues that are in dispute. Okay? So this is going to be an invaluable experience today, and I'm sure it's going to make a big difference for you in your very next evaluation, because you're going to have new confidence that despite what you receive in covered letters from the parties, despite what you receive, you'll have much more confidence in your awareness of what is the issue that's driving the need for the evaluation, and therefore what your role during the evaluation is supposed to be. Okay, so with that as our introduction, let's begin today's session. which is part 2 of our new series. And today we're going to talk about establishing the scope of the QME evaluation. Okay, so let's go over these labor codes now. And the first one to go over is Labor Code 4060. Now, Labor Code 4060 is going to be the labor code that drives the need for many of your evaluations. And it seems that the population of claims that involve a 4060 evaluation is only growing and is only expected to continue to grow into the future. So Labor Code 4060, let's read directly from it. It tells us that this section of the law shall apply to disputes over the compensability of an injury. The compensability of an injury. So Labor Code 4060 evaluations are many times referred to as the compensability evaluation. And then it tells us that this section shall not apply. Shall not apply. Where injury to any part or parts of the body is accepted as compensable by the employer. This labor code tells us everything. This labor code is the labor code that deals with the denied cases. It doesn't deal with the accepted case. It tells us this section shall not apply, where injury to any part or parts of the body is accepted. When the claim is accepted, it has already passed the compensability threshold. Compensability has already been established and has already been accepted by the claims administrator or the employer, and this section no longer applies. So when does this section apply? This section applies when the dispute is over whether or not an industrial injury occurred or not. This section of the law applies to those cases when there's a dispute as to whether or not the employee, the injured worker, the claimant, the applicant, the examinee, whatever you want to call that person, whether or not this person is entitled to receive workers' compensation benefits or whether this person is not entitled and does not qualify for workers' compensation benefits. So this is the section of the law that deals with denied claims. Denied claims. If you have an accepted claim, the claim's already been established, benefits have already been delivered, benefits have been paid, this section does not apply. So let me ask you, how many of your qualified medical evaluations have to deal with denied claims? Denied claims. In my QME practice, it's at least 50%, at least, if not 60, 70% of claims are deadlocked and stalled at the point at which the choke point of the issue, the delayed, denied, the disputed issue, has to do with compensability, with whether or not this qualifies as an industrial injury or whether it does not qualify as an industrial injury. So this is referred to as the compensability evaluation, and you're getting these evaluations. You can tell you're getting this type of an evaluation when the claim is in its early stages. This is when the claim is in its inception. Okay, so the examinee has filed a claim for industrial injury and is attempting to get some benefits going. It's attempting to get some medical treatment, is attempting to get some total temporary disability, but the claim is stalled at the hurdle, which is the compensability dispute. So these are the types of evaluations that you're going to be getting relatively close to the reported date of injury. These are evaluations typically that come around the 90 to 120 days after the reported date of injury. And doesn't that make sense? These are disputes that occur early in the inception of the claim. This is much different from a dispute that arises late in the life cycle of the claim. These are the disputes that arise early in the inception of the claim. Now, these types of evaluations have a very particular and specific handling, And it's important for you to realize that when you go into these types of evaluations, the dispute, which the parties are asking you as the qualified medical evaluator to resolve, the dispute has to do with compensability. Compensability. Whether or not the claim is a real claim or whether it's going to persist and die as a denied claim. So if we know that the dispute is over compensability, what does that tell us about what the dispute is not? What is not an issue in dispute? Well, obviously, since the claim is in its inception, permanent impairment is not an issue in dispute. If permanent impairment is not an issue in dispute, then apportionment of the permanent impairment is not an issue in dispute. If the issue is over compensability of the claim, is the issue in dispute whether or not the examinee has pathology, whether or not the examinee has a bona fide medical condition? Is the issue in dispute whether the examinee actually has the medical condition that they're claiming? That's not the issue in dispute, is it? The issue in dispute is there an industrial injury or not? So as a hint for you as a qualified medical evaluator, super sleuth, going into this type of evaluation, remember, the issue in dispute is compensability. Don't be confused and don't be confounded and don't be misled and don't be distracted by pathology. These examinees are going to show to the examination with pathology. They're going to have positive physical examination findings for pathology. They're going to have bona fide physical exam findings, and these examinees will be able to testify quite credibly about their symptoms and their limitations to activities of daily living because they actually are going to present with pathology. But in this case, the Labor Code 4060 compensability evaluation, the dispute is not whether or not the examinee has pathology. The dispute in question is whether or not the pathology can be traced to a bona fide industrial injury or not. So focus on what it is that you need to resolve as the disputed issue in these types of cases, and that has to do with the compensability of the claim. Okay, so this is the Labor Code 4060. And again, the clues that you're receiving a case under this Labor Code is that these are cases that you receive close to the inception of the claim. In other words, they will have a relatively recent date of injury, typically within 90 to 120 days, maybe as late as 150 days, but relatively close in time to the reported date of injury. Okay? And then Labor Code 4060 tells us if a medical evaluation is required to determine compensability at any time after the filing of the claim form, and the employee is represented by an attorney, okay, so when the employee is a represented injured worker, a medical evaluation to determine compensability shall be obtained. In other words, the QME panel is obtained. The medical evaluation is obtained. The way that they get you as the qualified medical evaluator is obtained by the procedure described in 4062.2, which we'll go over in just a minute. So, Labor Code 4060 evaluations deal with the compensability disputes, and then within Labor Code 4060, they tell us the procedure for obtaining a QME panel by referring us to another section of the law, which is 4062.2, which we'll go over here very shortly. Okay? Okay, so let's assume that a claim has survived the compensability hurdle, and the issue of whether or not the claim qualifies as an industrial injury claim or not has already been established and accepted by the employer or the claims administrator. So the claim has now been accepted. Okay? If the claim fails the compensability evaluation or gets stuck and choked at the compensability barrier, then that claim then becomes a denied claim and dies and disappears and does not go on to become an established claim. Well, for those cases that become accepted cases, okay, they've passed the compensability hurdle, disputes can still arise along any point within the life cycle of the claim. And that brings us to the next labor code that deals with the resolution of these disputed issues, particularly after the compensability dispute has been resolved. And that brings us to Labor Code 4061. So let's talk about Labor Code 4061. And this labor code is operative in many, many, many of the evaluations that you're getting. And in fact, it's operative in 90% of the evaluations that are dealing with accepted claims. Okay, the only cases that do not involve disputes after the compensability hurdle has been successfully surpassed by the examinee are those claims where neither party objects to the determinations of the primary treating physician. If the primary treating physician renders opinions and conclusions, and those opinions and conclusions are accepted by both the examinee and the employer, then there are no disputes. But if either the employee or the employer objects to a medical determination by the primary treating physician concerning, and here's the issues wherein the disputes can arise, concerning, number one, the existence or extent of any permanent impairment or limitations. Okay, so that's two things actually. Number one is the existence of any permanent impairment, whether or not permanent impairment exists. So say, for example, the primary treating physician has rendered an opinion that there is no permanent impairment, but the employee disputes this, okay? This is where Labor Code 4061 would come in. Or on the other hand, the primary treating physician has rendered an opinion that the examinee is left with some permanent impairment, and the employer objects to this, then either party can call for a qualified medical evaluation. So issue number one is the existence and or the extent of permanent impairment and limitations, or issue number two is the need for future medical care. Okay, so disputes over permanent impairment and disputes over future medical care, both of which are high dollar items in the broad scheme of the case, correct? These are high dollar, potential high dollar items. Well, when the employee is represented by an attorney, again, the medical evaluation to determine permanent disability now, the existence and extent of permanent disability shall be obtained according to section 4062.2, which again, we're going to go over here in a minute. So with your represented injured workers who have a distant date of injury maybe 6 months ago, 9 months ago, a year ago, 15 months ago, some distant date of injury. Okay, these are examinees who have undergone accepted medical treatment. These are examinees who have received, maybe they've received temporary disability benefits. In other words, benefits are being delivered and a dispute has now arisen. These are examinees that you're going to be getting at some point removed from the date of injury. This is in contrast to the 4060 evaluations, which are going to occur relatively close in time to the reported date of injury. Okay, so 4061 section B has to deal with represented injured workers. Let's see how unrepresented injured workers are handled under this same labor code. Okay, so let's read from Labor Code 4061 section C, which deals with unrepresented injured workers. It tells us if either the employee or the employer objects to a medical determination made by the primary treating physician concerning the same issues, concerning either the existence of permanent impairment or the extent of any permanent impairment or the need for future medical care, and if the employee is not represented by an attorney, then Labor Code 4061, Section C, tells us the obligation of the employer. It tells us that the employer shall immediately provide the employee with a form with which to request assignment of a panel of 3 qualified medical evaluators. So if the employee or the employer have an objection, either one, the procedure is the same. Even if the employer is the one that has the objection, the employer then provides the employee with the first opportunity to request the QME panel, which is important because it's the employee that then gets to choose the specialty of the qualified medical evaluator. So these are the types of cases that are going to cause your phone to ring, and when you answer that phone, it's going to be an unrepresented injured worker on the other end of the phone. It's the unrepresented injured worker who's calling you to make the evaluation. This is different from being called by an attorney, being called by the claims administrator. In this case, it's the injured worker himself that's going to be calling you for the appointment because the injured worker is following this procedure established in Labor Code 4061. And it tells us that either party can raise a dispute and may request a comprehensive medical evaluation to determine these disputed issues, which is permanent disability or the need for future medical care. But in the case of an unrepresented injured worker, the unrepresented injured worker obtains the panel through the procedure described in 4062.1, whereas represented injured workers obtain the panel through the procedure described in 4062.2. Okay? So let's review 4062.1 and 4062.2. Okay, and so let's read now from Labor Code 4062.1, which deals with the process for obtaining a QME panel for disputed issues when the examinee or the employee is an unrepresented injured worker. And I hope you can read this text. I see that it might be a little bit difficult to read. It tells us that if an employee is not represented by an attorney, the employer shall not seek agreement with the employee on an agreed medical evaluator, nor shall an agreed medical evaluator prepare the formal medical evaluation on any issue in dispute. So this process makes an unrepresented injured worker's pathway to the medical evaluation different from that of the represented injured worker, where represented injured workers have the opportunity to agree with the claims administrator on an agreed medical evaluator. But an agreed medical evaluator under this section of the law for unrepresented injured workers is barred and prohibited because what capacity does an unrepresented injured worker have to what capacity does an unrepresented injured worker have in agreeing upon a medical evaluator? Unrepresented injured workers have no familiarity with medical evaluators, whereas the claims administrator may have much familiarity with many medical evaluators, and attempting to persuade the unrepresented injured worker to agree to an agreed medical evaluation could place the claims administrator at a tremendous advantage compared to the position of the unrepresented injured worker. So in the case of unrepresented injured workers, the agreed medical evaluation is barred by this section of 4062.1. Okay, so unrepresented injured workers do not have agreed medical evaluations. Only represented injured workers have the option and opportunity for an agreed medical evaluation. Section B tells us if either party requests a medical evaluation pursuant to any labor code now, Labor Code 4060, 4061, or 4062, either party, that's the employee or the employer, may submit the form to assign a panel of 3 qualified medical evaluators. However, so either party, either the employee or the employer, can submit the form to request a QME panel. However, the employer may not submit the form first unless the employee has not submitted the form within 10 days after the employer has furnished the form to the employee and requested the employee to submit the form. So by law, the employee has the first opportunity to request the QME panel by submitting the request form to the medical director. This is important because the party submitting the request form shall designate the specialty of the physician that will be assigned to the panel, and it's the unrepresented injured worker that has the first opportunity to select the specialty of the evaluating doctor. If the unrepresented injured worker does not exercise their option and does not exercise their right to be first to the party and select the qualified medical evaluating specialty and submit the form to the medical director, and the employer has waited greater than 10 days after requesting the employee to do so, then the employer obtains the right and the opportunity to initiate the process, him or herself. Okay, so this deals with unrepresented injured workers. Let's see now how represented injured workers are handled under the same labor code, but under section 4062.2. Okay, so now it comes to dealing with represented injured workers, wherein the process is a tad more involved and a tad more cumbersome, and is a tad more definite because of the difficulty in dealing with competitive and opposing parties, especially now when an applicant attorney becomes involved. Okay, so 4062.2 tells us whenever a comprehensive medical evaluation is required to resolve any dispute arising out of an injury or a claimed injury, and the employee is represented by an attorney, the evaluation shall be obtained only as provided in this section. So let's see what it says. It says no earlier. No earlier tells us no earlier. Why does it say no earlier? Because the parties are famous for wanting to try to jump the gun and get a head start on the other party. So there has to be some rule in place to prevent that. And it tells us that no earlier than the first working day that is at least 10 days after the date of mailing of a request for a medical evaluation pursuant to section 4060. Remember, that has to do with the compensability evaluation. So these are disputes over compensability when the injured worker is represented, or, tells us, or, for other types of disputes, or the first working day that is at least 10 days after the date of mailing of an objection pursuant to sections 4061 or 4062. So either the employee or the employer is objecting to a determination made by the primary treating physician. That's what this section is dealing with. But no sooner than 1 working day, 10 days after the mailing, then, and only then, and no sooner than then, either party may request the assignment of a 3-member panel of qualified medical evaluators to conduct a comprehensive medical evaluation. The party submitting their request, okay, so this is why it's important that neither party jump the gun, that both parties wait the mandated time frame, which is 10 days plus 1 working day. Only then can the party that submits the request designate the specialty of the medical evaluator. They're also required on QME Form 106, which we went over in our last session. They're also required to designate the specialty of the medical evaluator requested by the other party if it has been made known to the party submitting the request, and also the specialty of the treating physician. And this is required so that the medical director can properly and appropriately assign the specialty of the medical evaluator to conduct the QME evaluation. The party submitting the request form shall serve a copy of the request form on the other party. So, doctors, this is important. So, knowing these labor codes, 4060, 4061, and then the two sections of 4062, which is 4062.1, 4062.2, knowing these codes and being familiar with these codes gives you tremendous insight into the scope of your evaluation, which many times the parties, they fail to provide you with the necessary details as to what your role and what your duty is during the evaluation. They fail to provide us this in the cover letters that they send us. And I learned a long time ago, I had this realization that of all the parties and all the players involved in the workers' compensation system, such as injured workers, such as claims administrators, such as qualified medical evaluators, such as applicant attorneys, defense attorneys, such as workers' compensation judges, such as raters down at the disability evaluation unit, such as judges at the workers' compensation appeals board. All these parties and all these players, I realized long ago that no one of these players has any idea as to the roles and duties and obligations of the other parties and players. They think they do. They think they do. In other words, claims administrators think they know what a qualified medical evaluator has to do. Applicant attorneys think they know what a qualified medical evaluator has to do. But let me tell you something. I've never had an applicant attorney present with me in the face-to-face evaluation. They're not allowed in that inner sanctum of the qualified medical evaluation. So they think they know what goes on with the qualified medical evaluation, but they don't know. Well, similarly, me as a qualified medical evaluator, I have no idea as to the roles and duties and obligations of the claims administrator. I think I do. I think I know that claims administrators sit all day and work on computer, and they answer phones, and they administer claims, and they monitor claims. But I'm not a claims administrator. I don't know exactly what they do. I don't know their scope of their duties and responsibilities. And I learned long ago that none of the players have any real idea as to what the obligations, roles, and duties of the other players involve. And so when we get our cover letters, we have to be a little bit forgiving and understanding as to the writer or the author of those cover letters. Many times our claims administrators, many times our attorneys, and they don't understand what we as qualified medical evaluators need or what we could use or how we could benefit by having more information and more data, so that when we go into the qualified medical evaluation, we have everything that we need in order to conduct the evaluation accordingly. So, because the parties don't understand what we need as qualified medical evaluators, we have to know this in advance. If we can understand this in advance, then we can take a new look at our cover letters and look at our cover letters with new eyes. The new eyes that come from the perspective of Labor Code 4060, Labor Code 4061, and Labor Code 4062. So when you look at your cover letter and you look at the facts of your case, always ask yourself, which labor code is driving the need for this evaluation? Is this an evaluation under Labor Code 4060? If it is, I know what to do. Is this an evaluation being ordered under Labor Code 4061? Where the case has already been accepted, but the dispute is over the existence and extent of permanent impairment. Oh, good. Now I know what to do. We can understand what it is that we're supposed to do. We can understand what it is that the parties are expecting of us by asking ourselves over and over and over again and getting clear as to which labor code is driving the need for the evaluation. So doctors, I hope this helps you. This is step number one in being an effective and accurate qualified medical evaluator, and that is in advance of meeting with your injured worker, establishing the scope of the evaluation. And if you can determine which labor code is driving the need for the evaluation, which the parties never tell us, they never come right out and tell us this, but if you can establish that in advance, well, then you'll know what to do, and you can provide a report that's accurate and that serves the needs of the parties, because it actually resolves the issue that's actually in dispute. Okay, so in our next session, we're going to talk about the next most common thing that they don't tell us in cover letters, and that has to do with the post-employment cumulative trauma claim. Now, in today's session, we talked about one of the claims, one of the species of claims that you're going to get over and over and over again, and that has to deal with the denied claim. Well, as a subspecies of the denied claim, a large population of the denied claims have to do with another circumstance, which is the post-employment cumulative trauma claim, which are now abundant and rampant in California, and you're going to be getting many of these cases, and it's up to you as a QME forensic super sleuth to determine in advance, like Detective Columbo, what it is you're dealing with, so that you know how to handle it properly. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on today's session. I look forward to being with you in our very next session of our ongoing series, which is the QME Forensic Super Sleuth. For now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter, wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.